the poems in this section. This thought experiment asks the reader to consider the text's questions of dimensionality, part and whole, concrete and abstract, presence and absence in a tactile sense, offering another means of conveying the oikos as a fragile unity. Everywhere worlds connect, Cyclianos writes. Through this project, whether actually undertaken or simply imagined by the reader, Cyclianos points us back to the world as a made place, in poet Robert Duncan's indelible phrase, and draws attention to our material involvement in these processes of world-making and unmaking. Jennifer Scapitone's The Republic of Exit 43 offers another poetic perspective on the made place of the capitalist world ecology. Scapitone's book is a complex, multi-genre study of the everyday sites of socio-ecological calamity, combining full-color collages, photographs, essays, and polyvocal poems to present a vision of what Scapitone calls the forces, the substances, the spills that breach and bind us. Her book begins with a particular site, a landfill near her childhood home on Long Island, which was named a Superfund location in the 1980s. You can just read this first poem as I talk, sort of the prelude to the book. This particular landfill and its history of industrial waste and cancer clusters, which appear contrapuntally throughout this text, serve as an opening for a larger contemplation of what is seen and invisible in our managed landscapes, what we live with, what we take in. Scapitone turns to landfills as a larger representative site, a monument to consumption whose remediation from wasteland to garbage Arcadia would seem to illustrate the success of waste management systems, pointing instead to their continuing life as they emit methane gas and excrete toxic chemicals into soil and waterways. Scapitone frames landfills as a material demonstration of the everyday dimensions of ecosystemic exposure, contamination, and degradation, which are a central component of the ecologies of capitalism. As she puts it, the infrastructure of tragedy turns out to be one and the same as the infrastructure of abundance. The landfill becomes, as well, the central formal organizing principle for the book, which collages a vast array of linguistic artifacts and registers to produce a layered text, a verbal and material archive of the indigestible contents of the mounds. Scapitone's combining of various kinds of found language, from corporate ads, newspaper stories, and Wikipedia definitions to legal and governmental briefs, provides a textual surround of many partial, fragmentary perspectives accumulating to narrate a larger story. The text continually moves among various locales, from spectacular scenes of ecological disaster, such as the BP spill, Fukushima, to the infrastructural forms of extraction and development central to capitalist production, fracking sites, coal mines, urban factories, nuclear plants. Through this ongoing movement across sites and discourses, Scapitone offers a complex narration of the oikos as what she calls the corporate dump. What Scapitone highlights above all across this work is a sense of metabolic relations defined by toxic enclosure. These choral portraits of the sludges as an inescapable daily surround emerges in the most palpable way in her allusions to various illnesses of friends and her own mother. She writes of facts whose unabstractions I seemed to feel coursing below motions and through our organs, through the concurrent valves of mom's chemo, and the unparalleled afflictions of an increasing toll of friends unreadied. The ill and threatened body is drawn into parallel with the degraded ecosystems, the grasses and shorelines that appear in cut-up images within collages. Are you clean inside? One-line queries. The Republic of Exit 43 vividly demonstrates how these conditions are not abnormal, but profoundly ordinary, though they often appear as isolated, not forthcoming to the naked eye, emerging instead as rumor, inhaled, and imbibed. These portraits of collective experience by Cyclianos and Scapitone evoke the complex psychic processes by which calamitous eco-historical transformations come to be integrated into social consciousness, made thinkable, and even normalized. We could say at a dinner party, we've almost killed all the animals, regretfully, Cyclianos writes. Scapitone's collaging of found advertising language highlights the way we live in and with a commodified surround that desensitizes us to calamitous unfoldings. If there is a principle of imagining otherwise in both works, it emerges in a decidedly negative register. Both of these books bear references to utopia. Siglianos in a poem titled Oracle or Utopia that explores the fraught history of Biosphere 2, a controversial and largely failed recent experiment to create a self-sufficient biosphere, which was partially funded by the monstrous Steve Bannon. And Scapitoni in her ironized invocations of pastoral. Such representations underscore the fact that speculative visions have often been the province of capitalist schemes and models for disaster capitalism, from waste management systems to geoengineering to space colonization proposals. Highlighting the ways utopian, or at least pseudo-utopian imaginings have often materialized as disastrous reals, these works gesture to the vital need for forms of hope, not yet colonized by capitalist logics. They do not elaborate on what those forms might entail. In so doing, they also draw our attention to the limits of an environmental politics that is framed either around virtuous individual consumer choices or green capitalist technological solutions. What makes these texts valuable in our era of ecological calamity, I want to close by claiming, is their commitment to staying with the socio-ecological determinations of our present, elaborating formal structures in and through which these complex relations can be apprehended. Texts in and of the Capitalocene, such projects think within its horizons and bear its history in their forms. The realist disposition of these books extends from their depictions of the reified second nature of everyday life in socio-ecological terms, the remediated landfill, now a green public park, the daily sustenance dependent on animal life and labor, to their very material bearing, the origami cutout of the animal globe, the collage scraps of consumer waste. Such material qualities carry historicity within them as part of what gives shape to the form, as Judith Butler writes of Lukács's concept of form. Through these material and discursive dimensions, this poetry formalizes a portrait of capitalist totality in terms of everyday crisis, where accumulation and destruction, development and diminishment are indelibly intertwined. This investment in portraying such discordant dynamics, in turn, returns us to the quote from Lukács with which this talk began, with its claim that a text might reveal an essence of its present that has not been heretofore uncovered, while a writer like Gauche might read this essence in terms of a new planetary mythos, pitting the human species against the prevailing conditions